Hello and welcome to Lordiversity Week here on Monstars of Rock, the Lordi Story, a true metal podcast production. I'm your host, Matthew Kessie, and it's been 3 days now since Lordiversity released, and hopefully most of you have got your copies, whether that was CD or vinyl or possibly both. And now that you've heard them, what a bloody masterpiece it is, I'm sure you'll agree. And never did I think any band could have kind of accomplished such a magnificent feat as this, but it's Lordi, so I'm not surprised. And now this podcast will delve deeper into this insane project, and I wanted to do something special rather than the usual documentary style episodes you're used to. In fact, I wanted to bring you on a journey, my own journey into Lordiversity. And around 6 weeks ago, I actually heard Lordiversity in its entirety, and I haven't stopped listening to it since I've actually heard them. But I started doing all of these interviews back in early August before I even heard one single song off any of these records. So these interviews that I'm going to be doing and that you're going to listen to, you're going to hear me talking in depth to those in the band and around the band, but without me actually knowing much at the beginning. So I thought it would be an exceptionally unique way of you learning about Lordiversity as I learn. And the cool thing is that you guys, now that you've heard the songs and the albums, you can actually piece together all of the information that's missing for yourselves. So really, you are being the documentarian here. But of course, as these interviews progress, I heard more songs and I heard the albums then just before myself and Mr. Lordi sat down to jump into Lordiversity itself. So, you will find out more detailed stuff when we get to that interview as well. It's probably important now to tell you as well that this whole week you will hear from Tracy Lipp, obviously today. Then you'll hear from Ralph, Yane, Hisi, Hela, Mana, and of course then Mr. Lordi on Sunday. However, there is no Eamonn interview, and that is because Eamonn was approached to do an interview. He was offered the opportunity to do so. However, he declined, and the reason for that being is that he said that he didn't have much to say about this whole record or records. So that was his decision. He was offered the opportunity, but he declined. So just so you know, so there won't be any Eamonn interview during this week. But hey, let's jump into today's interview. So you're going to hear from Tracy Lipp today, Lordys vocal coach and lyrical co-writer, a man who deserves a ton of praise and admiration for the work he's done on this record and of course throughout Lordi's history since early in 2001 and 2 when he started working on Get Heavy, and then obviously moving forward as well. He's done a ton with the band, and well, Tracy really deserves a lot of praise, and I'm sure you'll agree that when you listen to Lordiversity, you can see the amount of work that himself and Yane and Mr. Lordi and the band have put into all of this. So yeah, so we'll jump right into the first interview. So here is me and Tracy Lipp. When did you hear about Lordiversity to start with, and what was your first reaction when you heard about this crazy idea to have 10 albums or 7 albums eventually, what it ended up being?
Well, the way that it actually worked is I was in LA visiting my dad and in February, and I came back about March 5th or 6th, and I might have the dates off by 1 or 2 days. And the day I got back, Tommy called me and he said, "I've got a crazy idea and you have to say yes or we can't do it." And I said, "Yes." And he goes, No. You have to listen to the idea because it's pretty crazy and you have to agree." And I said, "Yes." He said, "Dude, you got to listen to this." And he said, "The band has already said yes, and the thing is, he's not revealing anything as he's telling me this stuff. Yeah. The band has already said yes, and oddly, our manager said yes, and he loves the idea. And so you have to say yes, otherwise we can't do it." And I'm like, "Well, what is it, dude?" And he goes, "Collection was my most favorite thing to do. And of that, there was a few things that I completely loved doing the most. One of them was working using real tape on a 24-track studio system in Tampere, and the other one was recording in the studio with you and Toivo there in Helsinki, and working with a couple of the other guys, but I don't have anything to do because it's COVID now and there's nothing going on. Everything is canceled. So I think it's time to make another Lordi record. But I don't want to make another Lordi record. What if we make all of the records off of those hits? What if we do all the records exactly the way we made those hits? So they're all, like the record from 75 is a 75 album. The disco album is a disco album, like that. And I said, absolutely, yes. So that's how the process started. And it was so fun, really fun. And yeah, and so we did all the vocals in our studio, and I did the vocal production, and it turned into a lot of work in the sense that even though Eamonn was doing A&R, somebody had to be keeping track of who has what files and where are all the files, and I ended up taking over a big role in that sense. So basically all the files would come to me. I would put everything together in Pro Tools and make a rough mix and send it to Tommy, and then he would say yes or no, and then at that point it would go to whoever was mixing it. That's kind of how the process worked.
Okay, and was it a daunting process to start? Like when you were sitting down to start on that first record, which I believe was Scarlett, Dinosaur, was that a daunting idea to kind of think, well, we've got 7 of these to do?
No, it wasn't, because we were working album by album, and so as long as we stayed on schedule, it was the biggest problem that we had was Tommy's recording system at home is at that point was very outdated.
Nice.
And the way to do it was to actually update everything so that he could do a bunch of work at home, and then we would take that work that he did and bring it to the next stage. And so in order to do that, we had to use the same system that these other people were all using, which was Pro Tools. And, his computer's old.
Yeah.
It's a great old Mac, and it runs fine, but it's way too old to be trying to start doing what he was talking about doing. So the first thing that we did to get ready for it was actually, we did a little research, and we got him a 16-inch MacBook Pro with the RAM maxed out, and Pro Tools 12, and then an audio interface that was Universal Audio, Apollo Twin, to so that he could do the work there. And so he would write the songs and do the demos, and then we would have a sketch of how the song goes. And all the keyboard stuff, a lot of that stuff stays on all the records anyway. So he just went ahead and found all the sounds and stuff like that there. So it really streamlined the process a lot.
Okay. And was there a lot more learning then involved with this kind of idea for all of you compared to previous records? Did you all have to kind of learn some new skill or learn a new system?
Me and Tommy had to learn how to use Pro Tools.
Right.
And so there was a lot of phone calls to the Tracy tech support hotline. and we would be, using WhatsApp video, and he would be saying, how come I don't get any sound of it? There's no sound coming out. How come I don't get any sound out? And then I'd have to go through the steps to figure out what was wrong. But they got less and less, because the process is the same for every song. So,
yeah.
It went pretty smoothly after a certain amount of time.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's research, because, like, on my side, writing lyrics, I wanted to make sure that we were writing time-correct lyrics, using the same kind of terminology and that stuff, and the same word phrasing, because it's changed through the years.
Yeah. And how would that change then for you? Because obviously, like with the process, I would obviously, as you said there, it would differ from a 1975 record to a 1995 record. So how does that writing process adapt and change? So what would you do different between that 20-year span?
Typically what would happen is I would maybe listen to a couple of songs from that era just so I could get in the vibe. But I mean, I know all this music. I was brought up with it, so I don't have to do very much research. I'm 75 was like, Kiss, Van Halen, I mean, it was those Aerosmith, it was those bands.
Yeah.
The lyrics were a certain way, and so, it was more about like what words were they using and what were they not using, and so the process literally was listen to a few songs and then start working. And since we're moving album by album, it was really easy because I would just get in the genre and then it's go. And then me and Tommy we did a lot of it together, which was more fun. And some of the stuff he would give me a rough of what he wanted, and then I would write it and send it to him. And sometimes he would have some of the lyrics done. Sometimes there would be like, this is called, this song, and go. So
very cool.
So that's how it went.
Yeah, and when you look back on the records that you've obviously done for this collection of different tracks, is there anything was overly complicated, or it became more difficult than you had perceived it being originally?
We all had an issue with, we would write like a super good song, and then we would put it in the genre, in the time frame, and then we'd be going, wow, this is a fucking good song. What if we could make this like a hit now? What if we just, updated it? And then, no, we can't. So that was the fight that we were having all the time. It's like, yeah, but if we just did this and added a few things, but no, it has to sound like it was recorded in 1979. And they just didn't do that then. So we can't do that now. Okay.
And when it came to Mr. Lordys Vocals then as well, obviously with such, what you're looking at 20 years in the difference between the albums, is there anything that he had to do differently with his singing style to make it sound different?
Yeah, he actually did a lot of homework himself on that. So my job was pretty easy, but I mean, there's a giant difference between the way people sang in 75 and the way that they were singing, on like, thrash metal, for example. Yeah. But he's an expert at that. He really, really knows what he's doing with this stuff. It was really interesting to see how deeply he understands this stuff. And there was problems that he would have where he's trying to make demos for an album and he's getting mixes sent from a different era. And so he's got to try and juggle that.
Nice.
And and I had that similar problem. So I was doing some of the edits, because I'd be doing edits and then there would be, somebody be sending I'm doing an edit for something that should have been recorded in 1984, and I'm hearing these disco songs, and it's like, I got to get my head into place.
And when you kind of look at all the songs that you have recorded for these albums, did it ever become hard to come up with new lyrics or new themes to cover in the songs?
Occasionally, there's always a song that's difficult. There was one of the 75 albums that was really tough for one of the songs, where we wanted to have mountain in the title because mountains are big and they're strong and powerful, and it just was, that was all we had, was like,
right.
This is going to be a mountain song. And it's like, all right, and that took a little bit of time because there was nothing else there, and it took a while to figure out what is this? What does that even mean? And so we finally cracked it, but it took a while. Tommy actually had to come up with a lot of story before we could finish the lyrics, because I've been writing Lordi lyrics for a really long time, so I'm pretty in what Lordi means, what these songs are about, what it is to have a Lordi song. But obviously he knows it way better than me. Yeah. So he a lot of times has to come up with this thread. Once there's a thread there, it's really easy for me to just go bam, bam, bam. Okay, now the song's done.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. And when it comes to, obviously, with both yourself, Mr. Lordi, and Yanni, you three are kind of juggling a lot of balls all together here yourselves. When do the other members kind of get involved then with these records?
Well, there was people involved the whole time because everybody had a role to play all the time.
Okay.
So, people, because obviously people's opinions matter also. People are making just... giving comments, and of course...
Sorry for interrupting this episode. Tracy here is actually talking about Eamonn, about the guitars and his solo work on the guitars. I had to jump in here because Tracy actually said Eamonn's real name, and therefore I had to insert this. And you might find that this happens in a couple of the interviews going forward, so don't be shocked, pretty much. So here's Tracy talking about Eamonn.
Got guitar stuff to play, so he has to come up with, his solos, because he writes his own solos. Nobody's telling him what to play.
Yeah.
And the drummer is really, 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 really involved in the whole process also, because he's the technical backbone of Lordi when they're on tour and stuff, and he's also a producer of his own in his own right.
Yeah.
So. There was a lot of people that were involved in a lot of steps at different times, and Hella had to learn her piano stuff, because she actually played a grand piano on the third album.
Right. Okay. Very cool.
Yeah, that was quite the thing to do that.
Yeah.
And so she can do it, so it's not a problem. She's actually great, but that's a lot of playing.
Yeah.
So that was, everybody was pretty involved, and then of course there was other little things that came in, because there's people that are doing these radio theater things, and we have some of the kids that are on one of the songs, and getting the kids to sing. That's all. There was just a lot of stuff for everybody to do all the time. I think everybody was really busy all the time.
Yeah. And when it came to, obviously, you have all, like, in a normal time period, this would be a lot of work anyway, but when you throw COVID into the mix, did that kind of bring its own complexities as well then, with the recording process?
Very little.
Nice, okay.
The nature of what we're doing, being in the studio is already very isolated, so we're not really inviting a lot of people into the studio all the time. It's not a party, because even though that would be fun, we're actually quite busy when we're there. And so we were very isolated, and the biggest issues we had were when Mr. Lordi could come down from Rovaniemi down to Helsinki to do the recording, and how many days he could stay. And that was always the problem. The first recording session we did, we recorded all the lead vocals and background vocals for 3 albums in about 5 days.
Whoa, nice.
And it was just like an insane amount of work. And after that, I said, let's do an album at a time, please.
And was that anything that kind of cropped up at times, that felt that you were done one album and you had to then revisit it to change something? Was that something that came about?
That would only come about if there was like some problem with some tracks not being sent correctly, or because sometimes there was a couple of the producers that for some reason or another, all the material didn't get to them, and then you got to like go back and open things up again and try and remember what's going on. But I was really careful when I was sending the material to keep things really updated. I was adding like names of songs all the time. It's like, so it would be like, please believe me. And then I would put everything in the title that's already happened, like background vocals done, drums added, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So it wasn't that bad, but there was some of that occasionally. If there was something that was really far away and then somebody's going, yeah, what about da-da-da-da, then I'd be like, really?
And just going back then to kind of the lyric writing, when you look at all of the records that you have done, was there any particular one that was more complicated to kind of come up with the lyrics for, or to come up with, say, the choruses or verses?
I think the progressive rock album was the most complicated one, because that was a concept album.
Right.
And
okay.
So getting all the material, all the story into the lyric is always tricky, and but it was fun, so I didn't really notice it as being, difficult. It was just, I had a specific amount of things that needed to get in there in a set amount of time.
Nice.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
And when, obviously, with every records that you guys record, both yourself, Ralph Ruiz, and Mr. Lordi tend to come up with the Scarlett Circle Gathering side of the records. So how did that go about with these albums? Is it something that's kind of intertwined between all 7 records, or is it something different with each one?
Well, it's different for each one, because even though this is a concept that we're doing, there's not a story that starts with the first album and ends with the last one. We didn't do that.
Yeah.
That would have been really crazy. Please don't tell me to do that, because he might try it. Each Scarlett Circle Gathering SCG, we call them SCGs. Each SCG sort of was specific for the albums, and some of them had radio theater and some of them didn't. It just depended on the record. So, Ralph is on most of the stuff, I'm on some of the stuff, but there's some stuff that doesn't have that.
Nice, okay. And when you look at the recording side of the vocals, say for Ralph here, because obviously he's in the US and he wouldn't be coming back over and forth to record them, how did that kind of recording of his side of things go for these records?
He has I think it's an iPhone 12, and he would put a blanket over his head and sit in his living room trying to, keep the traffic noise down from the street, and he would record into the iPhone's microphone, and then send me the file with iMessage.
Nice, okay.
And then I would get the content out of that, and it worked good enough.
Okay.
Especially since a lot of these things we were messing with the vocal afterwards. So, the initial recording quality, it's important, but the iPhone's good enough.
Yeah, that'll be able to kind of do a good enough edition of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And did it ever become an issue, that recording kind of with distance, with both yourself or with the band, say? Was there ever a point where you needed to kind of meet up together, or that it was essential that you were there in person to kind of come up with something or to record something?
Recording the background vocals for the that was a little bit of an issue, because
Tracy is talking about Mana here.
Didn't want to come to Helsinki because Helsinki was there was a lot of infections here, and so he just didn't feel safe coming, and so it took a lot longer because he had to record all the stuff himself, and I'm really strict about accent, so
yeah,
he would have to record something and then send it to me, and then I'd have to listen to him, and then I'd have to correct it or say, yeah, that's fine, for basically every line.
Yeah.
So, it wasn't for every part, but it would be for every line that he had to sing. Because sometimes he'd do a couple of harmonies, but once he had the pronunciation right. But it was a process that was going on all the time. I'd be teaching a class on songwriting, and I'd get a text from him, and I had to drop what I was doing and listen to it, because he only had limited studio time. And so if he's in the studio recording, I needed him to keep working, because if we're going to stay on schedule, then the mixing engineer needs the material within a certain amount of time, and the thing we were always waiting on was, background vocals to come in.
Okay, and when you look back now on all the eras that you've managed to cover on Lordiversity, is there any particular one that is your favourite to record?
Well, I loved doing the disco album because it was so different. We hired 2 background vocalists who sing their butts off, and made it, so that we've got the 2 girls singing, one part each, and then you just pan one to one side, pan the other to the other side, and it sounds like, a disco album. And the way they did it back then.
Yeah.
I actually called a friend of mine, his name's Jay Graydon, and he's a multi-Grammy award-winning studio guitarist and producer and songwriter. Like, for example, he played the guitar solo on Steely Dan's song Peg.
Right, okay.
And he wrote an Earth, Wind and Fire song that he got a Best R&B Grammy for. And so the guy was there. He's playing on Donna Summer records, and he played on Thriller.
Oh my gosh, Jesus.
So the guy knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, like if you Google Jay Graydon, then you're going to be like, whoa. But so I asked him how they did it, and he said, we did it exactly like this, and everything was done really quickly, and it was in and out. Like those recording sessions for those disco things, they were done really fast. So we tried to do that too. So it was fun.
Yeah. And
both of the girls sang great.
And when you listen back to those albums, is there any song then that jumps out at you as being like the best to your ear of them all? Or is it kind of hard to choose, seeing as there's 70 songs?
It's impossible to choose.
Yeah.
It's so impossible because, like I'll start thinking like something is really great, and then I'll be like, yeah, but so is that one. Oh, but so is that one. Because there's just tons and tons and tons of songs.
Yeah.
I think there's like 70 songs we wrote. Jeez. I don't know what the exact number is, but it's something like that.
Yeah. Insane.
It is. It's crazy.
Yeah. And do you think that will change Lordi going forward now? Do you think they'll ever go back to having an album just on its own as it is? Or do you think that Lordi's kind of moved towards this kind of mix of different eras? Is that going to be how we see Lordi from now on?
I really don't know the answer to that. I know I would do a modern album now if I was them.
Right.
But I don't know what Tommy wants to do. I know he's, anxious to get out and play for people.
Yeah.
But, I don't know how realistic it is to really start going on tour at this time. Because it just seems like maybe it's not safe yet. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
So, he's vaccinated, so... I don't know about the rest of the band. They probably are. Yeah. But still, there's a lot of this Delta variant is, a bit of a problem. Yeah. But it really depends on how you think about COVID. Is it just, do we treat it at this point, like just it's the flu, or is it more serious? I don't know. Yeah. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
Hard to say.
Exactly, and it must be so hard as an artist and as a songwriter, a musician, to kind of look at how the world is now at the moment and then write material but not know how it's going to kind of be interacted with. Like, are people just going to listen to it? Are you ever going to get to play those songs live? And obviously releasing an album in this kind of environment is a very difficult thing to do, because you see a lot of bands now pushing their albums out a little bit more. There's some bands that release their albums in the mix of all the lockdown, and it kind of gets lost in the shuffle then when it comes to the releasing of restrictions, that kind of thing.
Going out live is the way you have to do it. I mean, that's how bands are really going to make money and make a living, because it's about making a living, really.
Exactly, yeah.
It's I really don't know like hardly anybody that I've worked with in my whole career has been like, I just want to get rich. Everybody's like, I want to fucking make great music. The people that want to get rich, somehow you can feel it in the music, and it's not authentic.
Yeah.
So, we're doing this out of love for what it is, and like I love writing these lyrics. I think it's so fun.
Yeah.
I can get lost in this little world, and for however long it takes to write that lyric, I'm in that world, and I see the pictures in my head. Especially with these Lordi lyrics, because they're so visual.
Yeah.
So,
and
it's go ahead.
When it comes to obviously outside of you doing all these Lordi lyrics, like when these albums are all done now, for the vast majority of it anyway, what does Tracy do outside of that time? Because obviously this isn't, I don't think we covered that last time we spoke.
We didn't, yes? Okay, yeah. So Monday I was writing a song with Jamie from Girls School.
Oh, right, yeah.
So we wrote a rock and roll song together, because they're getting ready to make a new record. And I don't know if it's going to get on the record or not, but it's a cool song. It's kind of about they have something called their Bar Me Army, which is their fans.
Right.
And so it's kind of like a tribute to them. And I'm constantly writing songs with my writing partner, Maki Kolehmainen. He's a Finnish melody guy, and he's really talented. And then I'm working on trying to train up and break a new artist. Her name's Ipa, and she's actually singing on the disco album. She's one of the girls that's singing there. And so that's kind of like what the focus is. And of course, writing songs for other people. Like we just sent a song into New York trying to get it to Kelly Clarkson, but that's a really tough one to get something to her, because she's super, super, super picky about what she wants to. But it's got a direct connection, so they're going to hear it. But the question is, does she want it? That's the question. But that's the typical songwriter's thing.
Nice. So would you write a lot of songs then and kind of send them on to other artists to sing for themselves?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice, okay.
Absolutely.
And how would that process go about?
It really depends on if something's targeted for somebody on purpose, or if it's just writing to write. So typically it's going to be very pop. And so you have to get in the mind of a 20-year-old artist and ish, and try and write something relevant for that. And it just really depends on what the melody sounds like and what the song sounds like. And then I'm going to use the same writing technique that I used for Lordi to write the lyrics. It's that writing a great song is the same no matter the genre, really.
Yeah.
And then I also teach songwriting at a couple of the schools here in Helsinki.
Very cool. And man, before we finish up, is there anything that you want to add about the whole process that maybe I didn't ask you, or something else that's come to mind that you'd like to cover?
I think, like, for me, thinking about this whole process of doing this, it's just the teamwork was really great. There was some obstacles to overcome. For example, the piano was kind of recorded wrong on that progressive rock album, so I had to do a lot of editing to make the piano work.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, it sounded beautiful, but there was a thump from the sustain pedal, and so that was a bit of work. But it wasn't anybody's fault really, except for maybe the owner of the studio. But other than that, or the guy that tuned the piano, actually, because that's an adjustment to get rid of that. But I mean, it was just really fun, and it seemed really easy because we had the really good teamwork, and we had these WhatsApp groups going, and it just made communication really smooth. So without this connectivity that we have today. This would have been difficult, but it was just easy. So it was fun.
Well, that was Tracy Lipp there, and a huge thanks to him for his time and superb insight into his own experience of Lordiversity. And I hope you all are a little bit more enlightened, and you can all join me again tomorrow as I talk to Ralph Ruiz about all of his characters in Lordiversity. Kiitos, and I'll see you then.
Monsters of Rock, the Lordi Story is a true metal podcast production. The show is presented, produced and written by Matthew Kessie. Head to True Metal Pod's social channels to keep up to date with the production.